The letter felt cold in my hand, a stark contrast to the humid September air pressing against the windows of my home office here in Plano. Its sharp, linen blend corners seemed to bite into my fingertips. I'd built my financial planning firm, Hayes Wealth Management, on a foundation of trust so solid, so unshakable, that a letter like this felt like an artifact from a different reality. The logo of the Texas State Securities Board was embossed in the top left corner, official and unforgiving. My gaze drifted past the damning words formal investigation, elder financial abuse, fiduciary misconduct, and landed on a silver-framed photograph on my desk. It was of me and Mark, my husband of 15 years, taken on a trip to the hill country. We were smiling, his arm wrapped tightly around me. It was the smile of a man I thought I knew, the embrace of a life I thought was real. That life had imploded 2 weeks ago, the day I came home early and found him with Sasha, my childhood friend, the woman I had taken in from the cold 3 months ago, was wrapped in my husband's arms, in my kitchen, the heart of my home. The affair had been a wrecking ball, shattering 15 years of marriage into a million irreparable pieces. I thought I had hit rock bottom then, standing in the rubble of my personal life. But this letter? This was something else entirely. This wasn't just a betrayal of the heart, it was a meticulously planned demolition of my entire world. The affair, I realized with a chilling certainty that settled deep in my bones, had not been the storm. It had merely been the rain that preceded the hurricane. This letter, this accusation of a crime so antithetical to my very being, was the true devastation. And as I stood there, with the ruins of my marriage at my back, and the threat of professional annihilation in my hand, something inside me shifted. The grief didn't vanish, but it crystallized, transforming from a torrent of sorrow into a glacier of cold, hard resolve. They had come for my home. Now, they were coming for my name, and I would not let them have it. 3 months earlier, the house had been filled with a different kind of tension. Not the cold dread of legal threats, but the warm, bustling energy of a life being mended. Sasha had slipped into our routine with a practiced ease that I, in my blind compassion, mistook for gratitude. She was a ghost at first, flitting through the halls, always cleaning, always organizing something. She insisted on cooking elaborate dinners, filling the kitchen with aromas of rosemary and thyme, dishes she claimed her grandmother used to make. "It's the least I can do, Ames," she'd say, her voice soft with humility. "You saved my life." She'd pour Mark a glass of wine, always remembering he preferred the Merlot, and would listen, truly listen. As he recounted the day's frustrations at his sales job, she became my shadow, my supportive sister, the friend I remembered from scraped knees and whispered secrets under the summer stars. But soon, the supportive comments began to carry a subtle, almost imperceptible edge. I'd be working late in my office, finalizing a retirement portfolio, and she would appear at the door with a cup of tea. "You are just incredible, Amelia," she'd murmur, her eyes flicking towards the empty chair beside me at the dinner table. "Mark is so patient. It's amazing how dedicated you are to your job." It was a compliment wrapped around a barb, a tiny pinprick of guilt I was meant to feel. Another time, as I prepared for a weekend conference in Dallas, she hugged me goodbye, her chin resting on my shoulder as she looked at Mark. "Don't you worry," she said, her voice a comforting purr. "I'll make sure this handsome man of yours doesn't get too lonely." I'd laughed it off, grateful that Mark would have some company. I didn't see the possessive glint in her eyes, or the way Mark's answering smile was just for her. Her offers to help with my work became more frequent. "Oh, that looks like a mess. Let me just sort those client folders for you," she'd offer, breezing into my office. I was too busy to see it for what it was. Reconnaissance. Her eyes, sharp and intelligent, scanned everything. She saw the color-coded filing system, the way I locked my main computer but often left the secondary research laptop open. She saw the small notebook where I jotted down password reminders, tucked away in my top desk drawer. She'd bring me coffee, her fingers brushing the edge of a sensitive document as she set the mug down, her gaze lingering on the screen for a fraction of a second too long. I saw a friend trying to be useful. She was a predator mapping her hunting ground. I began to feel like a guest in my own home, an outsider to a comfortable intimacy that had blossomed between my husband and my best friend. I'd walk into the living room to find their heads bent close together over Sasha's tablet, their laughter ceasing the moment they saw me. "Oh, Ames. Sasha was just showing me this hilarious video," Mark would say, a little too quickly. There were lingering touches over the coffee pot in the morning. Inside jokes that I wasn't privy to. A shared language of glances and smirks that I couldn't understand. I was the responsible one. The one who worked, while they were the ones who lived, who laughed, who filled the house with a carefree energy that I was too tired to contribute to. And all the while, she was whispering her poison into my husband's ear. I didn't hear it then, but I can replay the conversations in my mind now, understanding the true meaning behind her words. I'd hear her talking to Mark on the patio while I was on a client call. "Amelia's just so brilliant," she'd say, her voice laced with faux admiration. "She built this all herself. She's so strong. She doesn't really need you, does she?" She reframed my competence as a rejection of him, my success as a monument to his inadequacy. She painted me as a cold, calculating career woman, and herself as the warm, nurturing soul who appreciated him for the man he was. She didn't just seduce my husband. She dismantled his perception of me, piece by piece, until the woman he saw was a stranger I didn't recognize myself. The conference in Dallas had ended a day early. The final keynote speaker had canceled due to a family emergency, and I found myself with an unexpected gift. 24 free hours. My first thought was of Mark. A familiar pang of guilt, the one Sasha had so expertly cultivated, pricked at me. Maybe she was right. Maybe I did work too much. I pictured a surprise evening at home, ordering from our favorite Thai place, opening that expensive bottle of Cabernet we were saving, and just talking, reconnecting. I smiled the whole way down, I-35, feeling a lightness I hadn't felt in months. Imagining the surprised look on his face, I let myself in through the garage, kicking off my heels and padding softly into the house. I could hear music playing from the kitchen, a slow, bluesy song. Laughter followed, a low, throaty sound from Mark, and a higher, lighter giggle from Sasha. I rounded the corner, a smile already on my lips, the words, "Honey, I'm home," ready to spill out. But they died in my throat. There, in the center of our kitchen, bathed in the warm glow of the under-cabinet lighting, they were locked in a passionate embrace. This wasn't a friendly hug. His hands were tangled in her hair, her arms were wrapped tightly around his neck, their bodies pressed together. He was kissing her with a desperate hunger I hadn't seen from him in years, and she was kissing him back. The heart of our home, the place where we'd made a million mundane and beautiful memories, had been transformed into the stage for my ultimate humiliation. For a moment that stretched into an eternity, my brain simply refused to process what my eyes were seeing. The grocery list on the fridge, the faint scent of garlic in the air, the ticking of the clock on the wall. It was all so normal, so horribly, sickeningly normal, except for the two people desecrating the center of it. My briefcase slipped from my numb fingers, hitting the hardwood floor with a sharp crack that broke the spell. They sprang apart, their faces a mixture of shock and guilt. Mark looked like a cornered animal, his eyes wide, his mouth slightly agape. Sasha, however, recovered instantly. She clutched the front of her shirt, her face crumpling into a mask of tearful remorse. "Amelia!" Mark stammered, taking a step toward me. It's not what it looks like. Not what it looks like." My voice was unnaturally calm, a quiet prelude to the storm breaking inside me. "It looks like you have your tongue down the throat of the woman I took into my home. Am I seeing that wrong, Mark? I didn't mean for this to happen." Sasha wailed, tears now streaming down her face. "It was a masterful performance. We were just lonely. You're never here, Ames. We were just talking, and one thing led to another." "Get out," I said, my voice low and shaking with a rage so profound it scared me. Get your things and get out of my house, now. Ames, please, let's just talk about this, Mark pleaded. His hands held up in a gesture of surrender. I turned my fury on him. Talk. There's nothing to talk about. She goes. Or I do. I gave him the choice. The final desperate hope that some piece of the man I married was still in there. He looked from my face, set like stone, to Sasha's, streaked with artful tears. And in that moment, he made his choice. He walked over to Sasha, placed a protective arm around her shoulder, and guided her toward the stairs. I'll help you pack, he muttered. Not looking at me, I stood frozen in the kitchen as they moved through my house. Their hushed whispers and the sound of drawers opening and closing, a funereal rhythm marking the death of my marriage. An hour later, they were gone. The front door clicked shut, and a silence descended. So total and absolute that it roared in my ears. I sank to the floor, my back against the cool metal of the dishwasher, and finally let the sobs come. Great, heaving waves of grief. I cried for the man I'd lost, for the friend who had betrayed me, for the future that had been stolen. And when the tears finally subsided, a grim, practical clarity took their place. My mind, my greatest asset, began to do what it did best: analyze, organize, and plan. I pulled out my phone, my fingers still trembling, and typed the name of the best divorce attorney in Dallas into the search bar. The devastation was immense. But I was a survivor. The worst, I foolishly believed, was now over. The initial shock gave way to a strange, hollowed-out routine. I moved through the empty house like a ghost, the silence a constant reminder of the life that had been stolen. I met with my lawyer, started the painful process of untangling 15 years of shared existence, and tried to focus on my clients, the people who depended on my clear-headed guidance. For 2 weeks, I existed in this limbo of grief and paperwork. Then, a courier arrived at my door with a thick manila envelope. Inside, the divorce petition felt like a second declaration of war. Mark, represented by a notoriously aggressive downtown Dallas law firm, wasn't just asking for the house and half our savings. The petition laid claim to 50% of Hayes Wealth Management, my business, the one I had built from nothing, pouring in years of sleepless nights and relentless effort while he was playing golf and closing mediocre sales deals. The audacity was breathtaking. It was a clear, brutal attempt to cripple me. To take the one thing that was unequivocally mine, and that was the moment my narrative snapped back to the present, standing in my office, the divorce papers on my desk feeling flimsy and insignificant, compared to the cold, heavy weight of the letter in my hand, the letter from the securities board. My eyes scanned the page again, the legalese blurring into a single horrifying accusation. The investigation, it stated, was centered on the accounts of one client, Eleanor Gable, Mrs. Gable, an 85-year-old widow. My client for over a decade. A sweet woman who still sent me handwritten birthday cards and considered me a friend. She was the most vulnerable person in my portfolio, a fact that now felt like a deliberate, sadistic choice. The letter was brutally specific. It listed 3 unauthorized wire transfers made over the past 2 months, totaling nearly $200,000. The funds were routed from Mrs. Gable's brokerage account to an untraceable offshore entity in the Cayman Islands. Transfers I had absolutely, unequivocally not made. The dates were seared into my brain. The first was the day I flew to the conference in Dallas. The second was a Saturday I'd spent volunteering at the community garden. The third was the day Mark and Sasha had left. A wave of nausea washed over me as the pieces clicked into place with sickening precision. It was an elegant, viciously crafted trap. The affair, the dramatic confrontation, the aggressive divorce filing demanding my business, it was all a smokescreen. A brilliant, calculated misdirection designed to keep me emotionally devastated and legally distracted while they executed the real plan. They weren't just trying to take my money, they were trying to destroy my reputation, to have my licenses revoked, to put me in a position where I might even face prison time. They wanted to erase me, professionally and personally, so they could pick through the ruins. This was the true betrayal. The affair had been a simple knife to the heart. But this was a poison-tipped dagger, twisted slowly, designed to annihilate my very identity. The tears that had been my constant companions for 2 weeks dried up instantly. The searing pain in my chest didn't disappear, but it transmuted, hardening from raw grief into something cold, dense, and powerful. Ice flowed through my veins where sorrow had been. My analytical mind, the part of me that saw patterns and calculated risks, took command. I looked at the letter, then at the divorce petition, and I saw them not as instruments of my demise, but as declarations of intent from an enemy. This was no longer a messy, heartbreaking divorce. This was a war. And I had been a fool to think it was over. In truth, it had just begun. Panic is a luxury I couldn't afford. It's a paralytic, a fog that clouds judgment, and I needed my judgment to be sharper than it had ever been. I took one long, steadying breath, walked to my desk, and picked up the phone. I didn't call my divorce lawyer. I called David Chen, my corporate attorney, a man whose mind was as precise and unyielding as a surgeon's scalpel. "David, it's Amelia Hayes," I said, my voice devoid of the tremor I felt in my hands. "I'm emailing you a document from the securities board. I'm the target of what appears to be a highly coordinated frame-up. I need to go on the offensive, and I need to do it now." I laid out the facts, the affair, the divorce petition targeting my business, the timing of the transfers, the identity of the client with the dispassionate clarity of a field commander assessing a battlefield. There was no emotion, only data. The war had begun, and this was my first strategic command. My second call was to a number David gave me. He called her a digital ghost hunter, the best in the state. Her name was Lena Petrova. When she arrived at my office the next morning, she was not what I expected. She was a woman in her late 20s with sharp, intelligent eyes, clad in black jeans, and a worn leather jacket. She didn't offer condolences. She just nodded curtly and got to work. "Tell me everything," she said, her fingers already flying across the keyboard of a ruggedized laptop. For 3 hours I recounted Sasha's arrival, her behavior, her access to my home. Lena didn't just listen. She ingested information, building a timeline, mapping my network, identifying vulnerabilities. "The home network is the soft underbelly," she stated, not as a criticism, but as a fact. They were sloppy. Amateurs always are. They think the betrayal is the masterstroke, but they forget about the digital footprints they leave behind. "I'll find them." Her confidence was a balm, the first real sense of hope I'd felt. While she began her deep dive, combing through every byte and log file on my systems, I had another, more important task. Driving to Mrs. Gable's quiet, rose-lined cottage felt like a pilgrimage. I had to look into the eyes of the woman they had used as a pawn, and tell her the truth without terrifying her. I found her in her sunroom, tending to her orchids. She was shocked, her frail hands trembling as I explained, as gently as I could, that there had been a security breach, and that funds had been illegally moved from her account. "But, you?" she whispered, her brow furrowed with confusion. "I thought I could trust you, Amelia." Her words were a physical blow, a stark reminder of what was at stake. "You can, Eleanor," I said, taking her hand. "This was not done by me. This was a crime committed against both of us. I am bringing in every resource at my disposal, and I give you my word, every single penny will be restored to you. You will not lose anything." I spent 2 hours with her, answering her questions, showing her the initial steps I was taking, and promising to keep her updated. It was a promise to her, but it was also a promise to myself. Reinforcing my integrity was the first step to rebuilding its defense. That night, sleep was impossible. Instead, I sat in the dark, forcing my mind to walk back through the last 3 months, re-examining every memory through this new, horrifying lens. Every seemingly innocent moment with Sasha was now tainted suspect. Her questions while I worked, which I'd brushed off as friendly curiosity. "Oh, Mrs. Gable, is she the sweet one who sends you the fruitcakes at Christmas? She must be worth a fortune." Her offers to tidy my desk, her fingers lingering near my files, her uncanny ability to be present whenever a sensitive client called. The pieces began to form a mosaic of pure malevolence. She had been studying me, learning my rhythms, my systems, my passwords. She had mapped my life with the meticulous patience of an assassin. The final, sickening realization settled upon me as the first gray light of dawn broke the horizon. Sasha's desperate, tearful phone call from that seedy motel hadn't been a cry for help. Her story of being wrongfully evicted and having nowhere to go was a lie, a carefully constructed Trojan horse, designed to get her past my defenses and inside my life. She hadn't stumbled into an affair with my husband. She had targeted him. She hadn't opportunistically tried to frame me after the fact. This had been her plan all along. She had walked into my home not as a victim seeking refuge, but as a predator stalking her prey. 3 days later, Lena called me into my own office. The air crackled with the low hum of her equipment, and the screen of her laptop was filled with lines of code and network diagrams. "I've got something," she said, her voice sharp with the thrill of the hunt. "The 3 transfers to the Cayman account were all initiated from your home's IP address. That's the good news and the bad news. It means the breach was internal." She pointed to a timestamp on the screen. "This first transfer? It was executed at 2:15 p.m. on August 14th. My heart leaped. I pulled up my digital calendar. On August 14th from 1 p.m. to 4 p.m., I was in a quarterly review meeting with the board of a local charity. An appointment I had digital receipts and a dozen witnesses to confirm. "I have an alibi," I breathed. Lena gave a thin, predatory smile. "That's what I was hoping. The perpetrator was inside your house, using your network, while you were demonstrably somewhere else. They were smart enough to use your IP, but too stupid to check your calendar." Her next discovery was even more seismic. She had taken the guest laptop, the one Sasha had used constantly, and performed a deep-level data recovery. "People think when they delete something, it's gone," Lena said, her eyes gleaming. "But the digital world has a long memory." She pulled up a document filled with recovered text fragments, remnants of deleted search queries from the laptop's browser history. My blood ran cold as I read the phrases aloud. "How to hide wire transfers. Best offshore accounts for anonymity. Statute of limitations for financial fraud in Texas." And then, the final, most damning phrase, a testament to Sasha's cold-blooded intent, framing someone for financial fraud. It was all there. A step-by-step digital diary of her malevolent plan. This wasn't just evidence, it was a confession. While Lena was excavating the digital ruins, I had started a more conventional line of inquiry. David Chen had recommended a private investigator named Frank Kowalski, a grizzled ex-cop who'd spent 20 years in the Dallas PD's Financial Crimes Unit. Frank was a man of few words and tired eyes that missed nothing. He listened to my story without a flicker of surprise, took a sip of his lukewarm coffee, and said, "Pattern of behavior. That's what we look for. Let me dig into your friend's past. People don't just wake up one day and become master criminals." Frank's report came a week later, and it was a portrait of a lifelong predator. Sasha Bell hadn't been wrongfully evicted. She'd been fired from her last 3 jobs for petty theft and check fraud. The eviction from her last apartment was the result of 6 months of non-payment of rent, during which time she had apparently convinced the landlord she was battling a serious illness. There was a string of scammed roommates and betrayed employers stretching back a decade. Her life wasn't a series of unfortunate events. It was a calculated campaign of manipulation and theft. My act of kindness hadn't been an exception. It had been her next, most ambitious, score. Frank's surveillance work was just as revealing. He tailed Mark and Sasha to their new, expensive rental condo, a place far beyond Mark's legitimate means. He photographed them meeting not just with Mark's aggressive divorce lawyer, but with a wealth manager at a boutique investment firm, no doubt getting advice on how to manage their newfound, stolen riches. They were documented on lavish shopping sprees at the North Park Center, dining at expensive restaurants, and test driving a new Mercedes. They weren't just hiding. They were celebrating, spending Mrs. Gable's life savings with an arrogance that was galling. They believed they had won. They thought I was beaten, buried under a mountain of grief and legal trouble. And they were already building their new life on the foundations of my old one. But every picture Frank took, every receipt he uncovered, was another stone in the foundation of the case I was building against them. With a mountain of digital evidence and a clear picture of Sasha's predatory history, I had the what and the how. Now I needed the who. Sasha was the architect of my ruin, but Mark was the key to its foundation. He had provided the access, the insider knowledge, the legitimacy she needed to get close. Sasha was a sociopath, driven by a void I could never hope to understand. But Mark I knew. His weaknesses, his insecurities, his vanities. I had spent 15 years navigating them. He was the weak link. It was time to press on him until he broke. I had Frank run a deep financial background check on my husband, a search into the parts of his life he had so carefully walled off from me. The results were both shocking and sickeningly predictable. Mark was drowning in over $50,000 of secret credit card debt. High-interest cards, cash advances, payments on a luxury watch I'd never seen. He had been living a lie long before Sasha ever re-entered our lives, projecting an image of success that was funded by a mountain of debt. Suddenly, his betrayal took on a new, more sordid dimension. Sasha hadn't just seduced him with flattery and forbidden passion. She had offered him a golden parachute. The plan she likely presented to him was flawless. A massive payday from my business in the divorce, supplemented by the tidy sum embezzled from Mrs. Gable. To a man desperate and suffocating under the weight of his own financial irresponsibility, it must have seemed like the perfect crime. He wasn't just a fool led astray by a cunning woman. He was a greedy, willing co-conspirator. The realization didn't bring more pain, only a cold, clarifying focus. His greed was his primary motivation, which meant his fear of losing everything would be his greatest vulnerability. It was time to plant the seed of that fear. I knew just the person to do it. Karen, a woman we knew from the local country club, was a notorious gossip who prided herself on being at the center of every social current. I arranged a chance encounter at a boutique coffee shop I knew she frequented. I made sure to look the part. Haggard, stressed, a woman on the verge of breaking, she descended on me with feigned sympathy. "Amelia, darling, I heard about you and Mark. Just awful. How are you holding up?" I let my lip tremble, mustering a convincing performance. It's more complicated than that, Karen," I whispered, leaning in conspiratorially. "I can't say much, but I'm so worried about Mark." Her eyes lit up with predatory interest. "The authorities, they're investigating my systems. They're not talking about a simple marital dispute. They're talking about a sophisticated criminal ring that targets financial planners. They use insiders, people who are close to the target." I let a tear slip down my cheek. They said anyone involved, even peripherally, could face serious federal charges: mail fraud, wire fraud. I just hope Mark didn't get tangled up in something he didn't understand. I hope they didn't use him. I left her there, sputtering with the sheer delicious drama of it all. I knew that within the hour, every word I had said, likely embellished for maximum effect, would make its way directly to my husband. The message was clear and designed to terrify him. This wasn't a messy divorce where he might get a slap on the wrist. I had framed him not as a simple adulterer, but as a potential pawn in a major federal investigation. His dream of an easy payday would now be haunted by nightmares of prison sentences and federal agents. The seed of doubt had been planted. He would look at Sasha now, not as his partner in passion, but as the dangerous criminal mastermind who had dragged him into a conspiracy far beyond his control. Her promises of wealth would sound like the bars of a jail cell slamming shut. With the evidence compiled into a neat, undeniable timeline of malice, My lawyer and I walked into the lion's den. We met with the lead investigator from the securities board. A stern, no-nonsense man named Mr. Davies. In a sterile government conference room, he expected a suspect, a defensive financial planner full of excuses. He was not prepared for what we presented. David Chen laid it all out with calm precision. The timeline of Sasha's arrival, the alibis for my whereabouts during the transfers, the recovered search queries from her laptop, Frank's detailed report on her history as a con artist. We weren't there to defend me. We were there to deliver his criminal case to him on a silver platter. I watched Davies's expression shift from professional skepticism to focused intrigue. By the end of the meeting, I was no longer a suspect. I was his star witness and the primary victim of a sophisticated conspiracy. "We will be watching Miss Bell," he said, his tone now one of grim partnership. "But to get a conviction, we need to catch her in the act, or irrefutably tie her to the existing transfers." That was Lena's cue. The next phase of our plan was to build a better mousetrap. Lena created what she called a digital honeypot. On my secure cloud server, she planted a decoy folder under the name of a fictitious new client. A. Sterling. Inside, she fabricated a series of documents detailing a massive recent inheritance account numbers, investment statements, all seemingly legitimate but entirely fake. The folder was a siren song for a greedy thief. And it was laced with every tracking tool in Lena's arsenal. Any access would trigger a silent alarm, logging the user's IP address, device ID, and most beautifully, activating a screen recorder to capture every single click and keystroke. Now we just had to make sure the mouse found the cheese. I once again leveraged the Plano social grapevine. I had a deliberately tense and private phone call in the clubhouse grill after a round of golf. Knowing full well Karen was at the next table. I spoke in hushed, anxious tones about being cash poor because of the legal fees and having to liquidate my rental property on Lake Travis just to stay afloat. The bait was set. To Sasha, who would undoubtedly hear the news within hours, it would translate to one thing. There was a large sum of new, liquid cash in my system, and I was distracted and desperate. It was a target she wouldn't be able to resist. The alarm came 3 nights later. I was sitting with Lena in my office, sipping tea, the tension thick between us. When her laptop chimed softly, her eyes lit up. "We've got her," she whispered. On her screen, a live feed bloomed into existence. We were watching, in real time, the desktop of Sasha Bell's laptop, broadcast from the IP address of her new luxury condo. We watched her mouse navigate to my cloud server. She was still using the password credentials she'd stolen. We watched her find the A. Sterling folder. We watched her open the fake bank statements, her cursor lingering on the 7-figure balance. Then, we watched in silent triumph as she initiated a wire transfer, routing the fake money from the fake account to the very same offshore entity she had used to hide Mrs. Gable's funds. Lena hit the record button, capturing every damning second. "The digital smoking gun," she said, a satisfied smile playing on her lips. "Welcome to the 21st century, Miss Bell." As if the victory weren't sweet enough, my phone buzzed with a text from Frank. He had been working the other end of the problem, tracking the original stolen funds. The text was short and to the point. "Got her, call me." When I did, his voice was gravelly with satisfaction. "It was a maze," he said. "The money from your client went from the Caymans to a shell corp in Delaware, then another in Nevada. But they all lead back to one place." He paused for effect. "A registered LLC called Bellwether Holdings? The sole proprietor and signatory on the account? Sasha Bell. She wasn't just stealing the money. She was building a corporate empire with it. We now had her for the original crime and the new attempt. The trap hadn't just caught her. It had slammed shut, and there was no escape. The message I had planted with Karen had worked better than I could have imagined. It had wormed its way into Mark's psyche, a seed of terror that was now beginning to sprout. His own lawyer, a man hired to launch an offensive against me, was now forced to play defense. I could picture the scene. The lawyer, grim-faced, explaining to Mark that this was no longer a simple, lucrative divorce. They aren't just defending Mark, the lawyer would have said, his voice heavy. They are building a federal case for criminal conspiracy. And as her husband, a man with intimate knowledge of her business, the investigators see you as a prime person of interest. The word prison would have hung unspoken in the air between them, a specter that would haunt Mark's every waking moment. While that fear was marinating, David Chen made our official move. He sent a formal, non-negotiable offer to Mark's legal counsel. The language was cold, precise, and brutal. It was a choice, presented in the starkest possible terms. Option A. Mark could provide a full and truthful confession, detailing Sasha Bell's entire scheme from its inception. He would have to become a cooperating witness for the state, in which case we would recommend leniency to the authorities regarding his involvement. Option B. He could remain silent, side with Sasha, and we would present our complete, irrefutable evidence against them both as co-conspirators in a multi-felony case. The offer came with a 48-hour deadline. The clock was ticking. The final, most crucial move was left to Frank. Legal threats were one thing, but to truly break Mark, I knew we had to shatter the personal delusion he was living in. Frank intercepted him in the parking garage of his new condo, just as he was getting out of his car. There was no threat, no intimidation. Frank simply stepped out of the shadows and handed him a thick envelope. "From your wife," he said, his voice a low gravel. "She thought you should see this." Inside, Mark would have first seen the photographs. Crisp, clear, long-lens shots of Sasha, 2 days prior, having an intimate lunch on the patio of an upscale bistro. She was laughing, her hand resting on the arm of another man, a handsome, wealthy-looking man. It was the exact same seductive performance she had given him. He wasn't her partner. He was just her latest mark. And she was already lining up his replacement. The second document in the envelope was the real kill shot. It was a certified copy of the incorporation papers for Bellwether Holdings LLC, the final destination for Mrs. Gable's stolen money. And there it was, in black and white. Sole proprietor, Sasha Bell. The offshore bank accounts were in her name, and her name alone. The dream he had built, the future funded by my ruin, was a complete fabrication. He was never getting a dime. She wasn't his lover. She was his handler, and he was nothing more than the disposable tool she had used to break into my life. That was the blow that finally broke him. His greed, his ego, his foolish pride, it all collapsed in on itself under the weight of that one devastating realization. He had been used, completely and utterly. He wasn't the clever man who had traded up. He was the fool who had burned down his entire life for a woman who was already moving on and a fortune he would never see. The fear of prison was potent, but the humiliation of being played so perfectly was the catalyst. Less than 24 hours after receiving that envelope, Mark's lawyer called David Chen. My husband had broken down completely. He was ready to talk. He was ready to confess to everything. The deposition was held in a glass-walled conference room on the 34th floor of a downtown skyscraper. It was a neutral, soulless space, all polished chrome and dark wood, chosen specifically to strip away any home field advantage. Sasha arrived flanked by her own bulldog of a lawyer, a man whose expensive suit couldn't hide his smug demeanor. She walked in with the unshakable arrogance of a queen surveying her new territory. She was glowing, dressed in a sharp, cream-colored pantsuit that I immediately recognized as one of mine. She believed this was her victory lap. The day she would put the final nail in the coffin of my frivolous claims and pave the way for a swift and profitable settlement. She saw me sitting beside David Chen and offered a small, pitying smile. Then her eyes fell on Mark, seated with his own lawyer on the other side of the long table. He was a ghost of the man I knew, pale and gaunt, his gaze fixed on a knot in the wood grain of the table in front of him. He refused to look at her. Sasha's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, a flicker of annoyance, but she quickly recovered, settling into her chair with a confident smirk. She was ready to lie, to perform, to play the part of the wronged woman who had found solace in the arms of a neglected husband. She had no idea she had just walked onto her execution ground. A court stenographer set up her machine, and the proceedings began. "We're on the record," David said, his voice calm and even. "Miss Bell, thank you for joining us." He didn't ask about the affair. He didn't ask about her relationship with my husband. He steepled his fingers and leaned forward slightly. "Miss Bell, are you familiar with the term wire transfer?" Sasha blinked, thrown off balance. "Of course! And have you ever held an account in the Cayman Islands?" Her lawyer interjected. Objection. Relevance? It will become abundantly clear. "Counsel," David said smoothly, never taking his eyes off Sasha. "Miss Bell, I'll ask again. Have you ever conducted business with an offshore entity?" "No," she said, her voice tight. "That's ridiculous." "Interesting," David mused. "And your previous employment, before you came to stay with my client? You were an administrative assistant at a logistics firm, is that correct?" "Yes." "And you left that position to pursue other opportunities?" "Yes," she snapped, her patience wearing thin. "What does any of this have to do with the divorce?" "Everything," David said softly. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a tablet, placing it in the center of the table and angling it toward her. "I'd like to show you a short video. This was captured 3 nights ago at 11:42 p.m. He pressed play. The screen lit up with a perfect recording of her own laptop's desktop. Her face, illuminated by the screen's glow in the darkened room of her condo, was faintly visible. We all watched as her cursor navigated my cloud server, opened the fake A Sterling folder, and initiated a wire transfer. I watched Sasha's face as she watched herself commit a felony, the blood drained from it, her tanned skin turning a sickly, pale gray. Her confident smirk evaporated, replaced by a mask of pure, unadulterated panic. Before she could form a word, David slid a bound document across the table. "Exhibit B," he announced, certified incorporation documents and bank records for a Delaware LLC called Bellwether Holdings. "And look at that, Miss Bell. The sole proprietor is you." He followed it with another document, Exhibit C. A forensic report detailing the search history recovered from the laptop you used at my client's home. It includes some fascinating queries about financial fraud. Sasha was hyperventilating now, her eyes darting from the documents to her lawyer, who sat stunned into silence. She finally turned her gaze to Mark, a look of venomous fury in her eyes. "Mark! Say something, tell them this is a lie!" Mark didn't look up. "And finally," David Chen said, his voice dropping for the final fatal blow, "Exhibit D." He placed one last document on the table. It was a multi-page statement, with a neat, familiar signature at the bottom of each page. A signed, notarized, and legally binding confession from your co-conspirator, Mark Hayes, detailing your entire criminal enterprise from the very beginning. That was the moment she finally broke. She stared at the confession, then at the back of Mark's head, the man she had so thoroughly used and discarded, who had, in the end, done the exact same thing to her. The trap had closed. A primal, guttural scream ripped from Sasha's throat, a sound of pure, cornered rage. She shoved herself away from the table, knocking her chair over with a crash. Her eyes, wild and panicked, darted around the room, searching for an escape that didn't exist. "You won't get away with this," she shrieked at me, her face a contorted mask of hatred. "All of you." She made a desperate bolt for the door, her expensive heels slipping on the polished floor. Her hand had just closed around the heavy chrome handle when the door swung inward. Framed in the doorway were 2 men, their plain clothes doing little to hide the grim set of their shoulders or the badges clipped to their belts. They were detectives from the Plano Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit. Mr. Davies, the investigator from the Securities Board, stood just behind them, his expression impassive. One of the detectives stepped forward, his voice calm but absolute. "Sasha Bell, you're under arrest for felony wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and conspiracy." Her desperate flight ended right there. her wrist encircled by a steel handcuff with a definitive metallic click. The sound echoed in the silent room, a final satisfying full stop to her reign of terror. The fallout was as swift as it was total. The very next day, the Texas State Securities Board issued a formal press release. They announced the arrest of Sasha Bell in connection with a sophisticated fraud scheme and, in an almost unprecedented move, they publicly exonerated me. The release commended Hayes Wealth Management for its proactive cooperation and instrumental role in uncovering a predator targeting vulnerable seniors. They didn't just clear my name, they polished it to a high shine. The letter of investigation was rescinded, replaced by a formal letter of apology from the chairman himself. News of the arrest spread through the tight-knit Plano community like a wildfire. The story of my messy divorce was instantly replaced by a much more compelling narrative. Amelia Hayes, a pillar of integrity, had not only been the victim of a monstrous betrayal, but had single-handedly uncovered a dangerous criminal and protected her elderly client. My phone, which had been silent for weeks, began to ring with calls of support from clients and acquaintances. My reputation wasn't just restored, it was forged anew in the fire, stronger and more resilient than ever before. I was no longer just a competent financial planner. I was a guardian, a protector. And Mark? He was left with the ashes. Our divorce was finalized quickly and quietly. The judge, having been made aware of the criminal proceedings and Mark's confession, threw out his ridiculous claim on my business. The final decree left him with exactly what he had brought into the marriage. Nothing. He was saddled with his own significant debt, and the legal fees for a battle he had spectacularly lost. His cooperation earned him leniency from the prosecutors. He pleaded guilty to a lesser conspiracy charge, and received 5 years of probation instead of a prison sentence. But his career in sales, a field that runs on reputation and trust, was over. He became a social pariah, a cautionary tale whispered at the country club he could no longer afford. His punishment was not a jail cell, but a lifetime of quiet, unremarkable failure, a fitting sentence for a man whose ambition had been eclipsed only by his weakness. 6 months passed. The autumn that had seen the start of my war gave way to a crisp, clear spring. The world was reborn, and in many ways, so was I. I didn't just rebuild my old life, I used the rubble to build something new, something stronger. Hayes Wealth Management was rebranded, emerging with a new, sharper focus. My new specialty became financial security for seniors. I channeled the trauma of what had been done to Mrs. Abel into a crusade, hosting free seminars throughout the Dallas-Fort Worth area on how to spot and prevent elder fraud. My story, now public knowledge, became my greatest asset. I wasn't just a planner, I was a survivor, a guardian, and my business thrived on a foundation of authentic. The house in Plano, with its beautiful kitchen and ghosts in every room, was the first thing to go. I sold it to a young family, hoping they could fill its halls with the happy memories it deserved. My new home was a stunning, modern condo that soared over the downtown Dallas skyline. A minimalist space of glass and steel and light that was entirely, unequivocally my own. There were no shared memories etched into its walls, no lingering specter of betrayal in its clean, open spaces. It was a blank canvas. And for the first time in a long time, I felt the thrill of holding the brush. One evening, I hosted a small, quiet dinner in my new home. My only guests were Lena and Frank. We sat on my balcony, the city lights twinkling below us like a sea of fallen stars, sharing a bottle of ridiculously expensive champagne. There was no talk of the past, no rehashing of the dark details. Instead, we talked about Lena's upcoming trip to hack a cybersecurity conference in Berlin, and Frank's plans to finally buy a fishing boat. We were an unlikely trio: the polished financial planner, the punk rock digital ghost hunter, and the grizzled ex-cop bound by a shared victory. A sense of easy camaraderie flowed between us. A bond forged not of convenience or history, but of mutual respect in the trenches. These people were my new foundation. The following week, a small, square envelope arrived at my new office. It was addressed in the elegant, shaky cursive of a bygone era. Inside was a handwritten letter from Mrs. Gable's daughter. She wrote of her mother's peace of mind, of the family's profound gratitude, not just for recovering the funds, but for my fierce and unwavering protection of their matriarch. Tucked inside the card was a recent photograph of Mrs. Gable, sitting in her sunroom, her face wreathed in a beatific smile, surrounded by her beloved orchids. She was safe. She was secure. I had kept my promise. I took the letter and the photograph and placed them in a simple silver frame. I hung it on the wall directly opposite my desk, the first and only piece of art in my new office. It was a reminder of the real bottom line, a testament not to the money managed, but to the lives protected. Looking out over the city from my window, it's hard to imagine the wreckage I was standing in just a short time ago. It's easy to become bitter when you've been betrayed so completely, to let the anger build walls around your heart. And for a time, I did. But what I've learned is that betrayal, as painful as it is about the perpetrator. Resilience, however, is about you. It's the quiet, stubborn refusal to let someone else's darkness extinguish your own light. There is a fine line between kindness and naivete, and I had spent a lifetime mistaking one for the other. My instinct to help, to trust, to see the best in people, those are not weaknesses, but they must be protected by wisdom. You can have an open heart without leaving the door to your life unlocked for anyone to walk through. The greatest lesson in all of this was learning to build stronger fences around a garden I still intended to keep open to the world. They tried to burn my life to the ground. They underestimated me. They didn't realize that I would rise from the ashes, stronger and brighter than before, forged in the very fire they set. My story is not about what they did to me. It's about what I did next. So trust your instincts, document everything, and never ever let anyone else write your story for you.